today because we're going to be talking about some hot topics specifically in the Ottawa area today, but I think they pertain to concerns and fears shared by people all over the area and all over the country, really. No guests on today, so we'll be wide open if you want to jump into the conversation. The best way to make yourself heard on the show is by calling us at 785-242-1220. That's 785-242-1220, just like 1220 a.m., which some of you are listening to us on right now. If you're streaming the show online on YouTube, there's a comment section on the right side of the screen. Feel free to jump in and discuss there. If there are any comments of note, we'll certainly try and work your point into the conversation here. You can always tweet me at DavidKOFO, or you can always email me at potter@kofo.com. But I know for a fact that today's subject is a bit of a hot topic around town because it's come up just about everywhere I've been this week. And that includes everywhere I've been on social media. And so a lot of people seem to be upset about some aspect of it or another. And if you have strong opinions on Facebook, then you can have strong opinions on the air too. And I know there is no shortage of people with strong opinions on Facebook out there. So once again, let's talk. Again, that phone number is 785-242-1220 if you want to jump into the conversation. So I've kept you on the edge of your seat long enough. What are we talking about today? Well, anyone who's kept an ear to the ground or on the radio or reads the papers knows about a couple of incidents in Ottawa, specifically Ottawa schools this week. Monday, both the Ottawa Middle School and the Ottawa High School were placed on lockdown, and rumors were swirling about an armed gunman in the high school, and it sounds as though that may have been what was reported to the student resource officer, so the rumors weren't completely without foundation, but the truth was the student was not at the school, but had brought an unloaded handgun to the school. He was at an off-site field trip when it was found in his backpack at the school by the Ottawa police. Two students, both under 18, so we don't report the names. We're not given the names by the police department, were arrested. One of the charges was defacing identifying information on the gun, which would lead you to believe it was likely stolen. Otherwise, there's no reason to obscure the serial number or anything like that, and I'm not going to wade into the waters of what may or may not have been the exact circumstances of what was going on. I know there are various rumors around what they were or were not going to do with the gun, but the situation was handled. It's unnerving, certainly not something we want going on at the school or at any school anywhere, but it has been handled by the schools and by law enforcement. And the next day, then we hear reports that someone had left a threatening message on the login screen at Ottawa Middle School, and I've heard it, and I'm sure a number of people out there have heard what the message supposedly said. I've not heard that confirmed by any authority, but given the message sent out to middle school parents and given the commotion and the widespread holding kids out of school on Wednesday, it appears that the threat said something to do with the school on Wednesday specifically. School officials looked into it, said they had no reason to believe it was a legitimate threat. Lo and behold, it was not. Most likely just a kid either taking advantage of the situation at the high school on Monday or just a coincidence, just wanting to try and wreak some havoc. And it did not turn out to be a legitimate threat, as the Ottawa School District officials had told the public that it was. I actually had something very, very similar happen my freshman year of high school, which was not around here, but someone had written in multiple places on the walls all over the school, and that was before every school had cameras all over the place, which is pretty commonplace now, at least in larger areas. But at that time, someone had made a threat specific to a single day, to kids coming to school on a single day. Parents panicked, people panicked, the school made the same determination that there wasn't really any legitimacy to the threat. They did keep the school open, but as a precaution there were police officers checking our bags as we entered the school. And as I recall, this was almost 20 years ago now. Wow. My freshman year of high school is almost 20 years ago. a strange thought, but I think probably half the students didn't show up that day. But yeah, still, nothing happened. Nothing, as far as I know or anyone else was concerned. Nothing even came close to happening. But despite the lack of anyone getting hurt in these incidents and the absence of any evidence of the schools, mishandling it or the police mishandling it in any way, it has nonetheless ignited some public outcry, or at least public irritated murmurings. And just like anything else these days, it of course has generated lots of Facebook drama, which is shocking. I know, it doesn't take a whole lot to generate Facebook drama. So when something legitimately exciting does happen, then you can usually expect various groups and individual Facebook pages to blow up, and that's pretty much exactly what happened this week. And one thing I will say I understand about people getting irritated with the schools is perhaps a lack of communication. I do have a child at Ottawa Middle School. I did get an email saying that school was on lockdown. I went back and looked at that today as I was preparing for the show, and I received that email at 11:56, and at that point the lockdown was actually almost over. I think it was less than 10 minutes later we found out that it had been lifted, and that was actually during the noon broadcast, and I had mentioned that on the air as soon as I found out. So, it took a while for that message to be relayed to parents, but of course administration has a lot more going on in a situation like that than just sending out communication. But at the same time, if you're a parent of a child who's in a school on lockdown, that's a stressful situation, and probably something you would like to be notified of. And I also know there are parents who don't get their emails on their phones, so they didn't even hear about it until they got home. So perhaps some cause for concern there within the communication mechanism, and that's fine. I get that. What I don't get, or I get where it's coming from, but I suppose what I fundamentally disagree with is the panic and the anger that's stemming from this. And maybe if you're not online much and you're not in the right social circles, perhaps you haven't really heard that sentiment. But I've heard so much complaining about the schools on this, and most specifically, I keep hearing these words: active shooter training. Active shooter training. And I know law enforcement holds these classes. I believe they held a public one here just in Ottawa not too long ago. There are a number of other businesses and groups that will come to your place of business, school, whatever, take you through different scenarios, different ways to act, decisions you have to make in that moment. If, whatever building you work in, go to school in, spend your time in, were to ever be affected by that scenario. It's obviously something that frightens a lot of people. We've seen, not just at schools, but just overall, there have been workplace shootings. Obviously, the Orlando nightclub shooting, the San Bernardino. Well, there's the San Bernardino's having a rough year, so they had the shooting at the school just a few days ago, earlier this week, and then at the holiday party last year. So, this is something that's on the public's mind. And it's understandable why, because anytime something like this happens, at least for a couple days afterward with the 24-hour news cycle, we hear about it constantly. And when you hear about something that frightening constantly, that's going to be in the forefront of your mind. That's going to be a concern. And I do think it's beneficial to have some knowledge on different tactics and measures that can be taken should a dangerous situation like that break out. You should have an idea of what to do. Everyone should be familiar with the escape routes where they work. If you're in a school situation, if you're a teacher, you should have, a plan for what you need to tell the kids, because they're going to be looking to you in that situation, especially younger kids, as far as what they should do. And so you're going to be leading them, and so there should be a plan in place. And just like any other school district, the Ottawa School District does have plans in place for what to do in that situation. But it seems like a lot of people feel in this area that that's not enough. I just keep hearing those words: active shooter training, whether that's Alice, I think, is the most common one, but there are a number of different varieties of it. But just to dispel a myth that is circulating around town, Ottawa teachers do have policies and procedures in place and instructions on how to respond to emergency situations, such as an attack of some kind. And where this idea that I keep hearing in the community that no one knows what to do if a school is attacked seems to stem from the fact that the Ottawa School District, as well as many other area school districts — I happen to live in Ottawa, so that's the one I'm going to hear most about — but they will not participate in active shooter trainings like ALICE and CRASE, things like that. And to those of you who are really pushing that aspect, you're probably not going to like what I'm about to say, but the push for students, especially younger students, to be involved in trainings of that nature is lunacy. It's based on emotional appeals and, quite frankly, groups and businesses playing on those fears to push an agenda. Now, that's not the case for law enforcement when they have public trainings along those lines. Obviously, law enforcement is looking out for public safety, but there are other groups that see a business opportunity, and whether that's based on reality or based on fear, it presents the same opportunity one way or another. And look, we all love our children. We want to protect them. And when we hear about these things like Sandy Hook and Columbine and again, what happened in San Bernardino just this week, in fact, the same day as the gun being found at the high school, that scares us. And it scares me too. I have 3 kids, 2 of them are school age, but you can't let the emotional part of your brain override the logical part of your brain. And I can see it happening when I hear members of the community grumbling about how kids need to be trained on what to do if someone comes busting through the door with a gun, or how teachers need more specific training on that. And again, I have nothing against the idea of training teachers and going over what actions are available and what actions are or are not helpful. But this really in-depth hands-on training that's being offered by several groups, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Every building is different. Every organization is different. Every group is different. Very few buildings are built like a school. In a school, you have a number of classrooms that are holding a large number of children inside, anywhere from maybe 5 or 10 to upwards of 20 or 25, and they're in a confined area. I used to work at an office in an office building where we were in rows of cubicles, and really it was just a giant open room. There were no actual walls separating people or actual offices. It was just row after row of cubicle walls. That's an entirely different setup than someone in a school. So there's no one-size-fits-all training. I know that some of these groups that put these on will come to your individual place of business or school, whatever it may be, and we'll kind of look at the layout and tailor that training to that situation. But if you look at how things have happened in Newtown and in Columbine, really there are 2 situations where if a gunman wants to go into a school and harm people, harm children, they can either do it during a class time when they can go from room to room, or they can do it, I believe Columbine was I believe it might have been before the school day started, but when people were gathered in a large commons area and everyone was sort of restricted to that area and in a large group. And in either of those situations, if you've got artillery, if you've got weapons that can do a lot of damage in a short period of time, and you've got weapons that will fire rapidly, then you're going to be able to hurt a large number of people. There's not much you can do about that. But that's just the logistical side. I'm by no means an expert on that, but there's more to it. There's more to why I don't support this, and we'll go ahead and take our first break of the show, and then I'll be back and go into those details a little bit more. But stay tuned. You are listening to Your Town here on KOFO. And welcome back to Your Town here on KOFO. We're talking the events at the Ottawa School District, specifically Ottawa High School and Ottawa Middle School this week, and the concept of these really hardcore active shooter trainings that exist out there, that there seems to be a public push for getting into the schools. I know it's not limited to around here. It's in a lot of different places, but I'm hearing it a lot. Specifically with regard to the Ottawa School District. And if you're someone who supports that sort of training in order to prepare children for the event of that scenario, I want you to think about something for a second. I think most of us have probably at one time or another attended a children's basketball game or soccer game. I think anyone would agree that controlled chaos is probably a pretty good description of those games. I've coached elementary school age children anywhere between kindergarten and fifth grade in several different sports. I've tried implementing basic plays and schemes. Let me tell you, it's hard enough to get the kids to remember what position they're playing and where they should be on the court or on the field. And that's with a couple of practices each week, just focusing on implementing fundamental aspects of the game. So for anyone listening who's upset that these trainings aren't taking place, please tell me. Call us up at 785-242-1220. Please tell me why putting kids through a one-time training like this is going to equip them to handle what would be the most terrifying, stunning, horrific situation they're ever going to face. Tell me how a training like this is going to teach a large group of kids to act in concert with one another and their teacher to thwart someone pointing a C-15 at a classroom full of kids. Kids can't pick out clothes that match, and you think they're going to be able to make a split-second decision on how best to properly address a situation that, quite frankly, they're not mentally capable of preparing themselves for? What is it with people in our society, this bizarre assumption that when things hit the fan, we're all going to turn into Jason Bourne? This Hollywood notion that if we're under attack, all we need is a gun on our hip and a self-defense class, and we're ready to take on anything that's thrown at us. If you're carrying a gun and someone points a gun at you and demands your wallet or purse, statistically, do you know what your most likely reaction is? The same reaction as someone who isn't carrying a gun. If you're a black belt and someone sticks a knife in your face, demands your wallet, you know what your most likely reaction is, statistically? The same as someone who has no self-defense training whatsoever. I'm not talking about trained police officers and military personnel. I'm talking about civilians. And now why do I make that distinction? Because those individuals have gone through countless hours of training before they go carrying a weapon into deadly or potentially deadly situations. For example, if you want to become part of the Kansas Highway Patrol, I looked this up, this is all directly from their website, you complete 23 weeks of training at the KHP Academy, followed by 16 weeks of on-the-job training, and only then do they feel you're equipped to be on your own in the field. Now that makes for 39 weeks of training, about 9 months of solid training to become a police officer for the Kansas Highway Patrol. To get through Marine boot camp, you have to complete 13 solid weeks, and there you're living, sleeping, eating, breathing training. And after that, in the military, you're constantly going through drills and further training. It's your life. You don't go through boot camp, get a gun, and then just get told, all right, that's it, do what we showed you. Law enforcement have the same requirements to update training as well. Their training doesn't stop once they complete the academy. And honestly, in high-stress situations, because the fact is some of those highly trained people make mistakes, and sometimes deadly ones, because they're human. And humans don't react the way they otherwise would when they're in a situation with more stress than you can even imagine without having gone through it. So to go back to my original point, given everything I just said, does anyone really feel like we're making kids safer by making them take an ALICE course for a few hours? I think it's fine to teach older kids, like teenagers, some basic things to try and remember if that situation or another dangerous situation were to come up. I mean, we do it with tornadoes, we do it with fires. Those are not likely scenarios either, but we still have kids prepared for them, and this is something we should have kids generally prepared to react to in some way. And obviously teachers, since they're going to be in charge of the children's safety, if something like that happens, they should know the proper way to react to the situation. But even then, unless you're going to make teachers who spend a fair amount of time, teaching, unless you're going to make them complete hours and hours of training and repeat it regularly, even then you're probably spinning your wheels by trying to turn them into someone who can keep a bunch of children safe from a heavily armed individual wanting to harm them. So in trying to do the same thing for small children, it's not only pointless, but you could make the argument that it's harmful. Yes, school shootings do happen. We hear about them every time they do. It's all over the news. It's all over social media, and it's frightening. But does that mean we should send the message to 8-year-olds that we're putting them in a dangerous environment for 8 hours a day, where they should be concerned about some guy with an assault rifle busting in at any time, just because it's a remote possibility? I mean, they have enough to worry about at school. There are issues in the schools with bullying, and just frankly being a kid is not necessarily easy. So is that a message that we want to send to kids in our schools? And consider this. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, I'll just walk you through my numbers here. There are roughly 130,000 schools in the K through 12 area in the United States. And on average, most states require roughly, I went with a number of 175 days of school per year. But it varies from area to area, but that's pretty average. It's about 175 days of school per year. So for all schools in the U.S. combined, there are roughly 23 million school days in a given year. If you add up every one of those 130,000 schools and every one of their 175 days of school, you come up with about 23 million in-session days. And there were 12 school shootings that occurred inside a K through 12 school last year. And all of them were at middle and high schools. None were at elementary schools. But 12 school shootings out of 130,000 schools holding 23 million in-session days. 12 of those 23 million possible days involved a school shooting. So that's 1 in every 1.9 million school days there was a shooting. 1 in 1.9 million. Now, on average, 270 people are struck by lightning each year in the United States. That's 1 in every 1.1 million people we can expect to be struck by lightning. You should literally be more concerned about your child being struck by lightning than you should about them experiencing a school shooting. So based on that probability, you would want to throw a fit about school districts not putting kids going through a training that will A, make them question their safety at school, and B, probably not do a thing for them if the situation ever arose. And you're doing that on the basis of a fear of something that is literally significantly less, almost half as likely as your child being struck by lightning. I'm not even talking about the risk of your child actually getting hurt in an incident like this, just being in a building where a shooting takes place during a school day. Find somewhere else to direct that anger. I'll tell you what scares me as much as anything right now is how scared people are in general. You have people buying up weapons for self-protection. The percentage of the population that owns a gun has not really gone up much in the last decade or so, but the number of guns being sold has. So you have the same people buying even more guns and becoming even more heavily armed. And they're buying them for, there's always hunting rifles, things like that. But a lot of people are buying them for self-protection and talking about how the world's going to hell in a handbasket and society's falling apart around us. Last year when he was campaigning, we heard our president talk about murder rates skyrocketing and how dangerous America has become. And people feel like you're at risk the second you step outside your door. To go back a couple of weeks, I attended the Ottawa Legislative Coffee on it was April 1st, I guess. And after the coffee, I ended up in a conversation with a couple of women who are of a different generation than I am. And it was interesting to hear them talk. I didn't participate in the conversation as much as I just listened. My wife was there too, and there were two women that we were conversing with. And it was interesting to me to hear how much fear they have of what goes on in everyday life. And the subjects ranged from terrorism to people entering the country without permission to they had specifically brought up the active shooter training and the lack thereof in the Ottawa schools, how they had gone through it. It was something vital to us that everybody needs to go through. They explained how in the training that they attended, the actors would get, quote unquote, killed if they did the wrong thing. At the end of every scenario, you'd find out who was dead. And they wanted to put children through that same sort of scenario, at the school where, some of these kids probably feel more safe than they do at home, depending on what sort of situation they're going up in. But people feel like you're at risk the second you step outside your door. So let's do an exercise for a moment, not physical exercise. It's tough to do that if you're in your car driving around, listening to the radio. But think, how much more violent crime is there now than there was, say, 25 years ago? So I'm 33. So if you're my age, that means middle school. If you're 40 or 45, you're thinking back to your teenage years. If you're closer to 50 or 55, think back to when you were raising your kids. How much more crime, violent crime specifically, is there now than there was back then? And violent crime meaning, aggravated assault, murder, rape, things of that nature that involve a violent act. Would you say twice as much, 3 times as much, 4 times as much? Now, some of you may see this coming, but here's where I'm going to pull the rug out from under you. How about only 57% as much? Violent crime rates have decreased by nearly half since the early 90s. Our violent crime rate today is about what it was back in 1972. So to those of you who grew up in the 60s and 70s and mourn for the good old days when society was so much kinder and safer, our violent crime rate is back down to where it was then, in that era. But here's a huge difference in society between now and then. It has nothing to do with crime itself. It has to do with information. When the crime rate was soaring back in the 80s, chances are you only found out about something terrible if your local paper or local news decided it was worth telling you about, or maybe if you read USA Today or one of the national papers where you'd hear about a little more. And then along came cable news networks and the 24-hour news cycle. And now news is not being consumed nearly as much at a local level the way it used to be. It's national. And that's why I think it's important that you listen to local radio stations like here at KOFO, where we do try and keep you as informed as possible on local things, and then the broader state level, national level things, world level things. We have the ABC updates, and we'll write stories about those too. But we try and keep you as informed as possible about what's going on in your area, where it's really more relevant to you. You're not getting inundated with things that really don't necessarily even apply. And you're not hearing about the handful of awful things happening periodically in your area anymore because of that national focus to the news. You're being inundated with news and information about every terrible thing happening in the entire country. And that bombardment with horrifying stories of murders and sex crimes and suicides and, yes, school shootings has convinced a whole lot of people out there that we're all living in a war zone. And sure, there are some dangerous high crime areas where it legitimately does feel that way. But if you're in KOFO's listening area, you aren't in one of those places. And social media now propagates it even faster. It allows for more spin, and something happens within a few hours. Not only do you have just a ton of articles out there, but you've got very flimsy sources reporting on it from their personal perspective, writing with a load of bias, and people who agree with that angle take it, share it on Facebook and Twitter. Now you don't only get awful stories, but slanted awful stories are rampantly circulating, and it makes the information that much worse. And depending on what the bias is, it makes it feel even more frightening. So we've got one more break to take, and then we'll kind of bring this full circle and wrap things up. Once again, there's still a little bit of time to call in if you want. 785-242-1220. You're listening to Your Town here on KOFO.
Night and head on over to DIY Supply, 2204 South Princeton Circle Drive, South Ottawa.
Did you know Dr. Hale's office is a full-service dental care center? If you have stained, cracked, or missing teeth, Dr. Hale can treat these and other dental concerns and bring confidence back to your smile. For quality care in a relaxed environment, call Dr. Hale's office, 242-1800.
Franklin County, Kansas is now accepting applications for 2 seasonal positions. Chemical Applicator 1 with duties including chemical applications to roadsides and counties' rights-of-way, and Seasonal Light Equipment Operator. Primary duties include operating a variety of light equipment and mowing roadsides and counties' rights-of-way. Interested individuals must have valid Kansas driver's license. Apply online at hrepartners.com. Application deadline is Sunday, March 26. Franklin County is an equal opportunity employer.
You started your business because you have something special to offer, and you want customers to know it from the moment you hand them your card. That's why now is the time to go to Vistaprint.com to get 500 customized, high-quality business cards starting at just $9.99. Choose everything about your card with thousands of customizable designs for every industry, and our support specialist standing by to help. Head to Vistaprint.com to get 500 business cards starting at $9.99. Use promo code 8844 at checkout. That's Vistaprint.com, promo code 8844.
You're listening to Your Town with David Potter on 103.7 FM and 1220 KOFO.
You're at Lowe's buying Choice Deck composite decking. You're at Lowe's buying Choice Deck because you don't always remember to wear your flip-flops, and stepping barefoot on a hot deck will instantly make you feel a sense of burning regret. Luckily, Lowe's is the only place to get Choice Deck with the new Cool Deck technology, which stays cool in hot weather and requires no sanding, staining, or painting. All projects have a starting point. Start with Lowe's. Call 1-800-GO-LOWES for a free in-home consultation for your deck project.
What am I doing flying through space on a cheetah made of lightning? It's a metaphor for Simple Mobile's blazing fast 4G LTE network. With Simple Mobile, you get this network and truly unlimited high-speed data for just $60 a month. If you want better wireless, the answer is simple.
Available at Kroger, Family Dollar, Best Buy, and other national retailers. Video typically streams at DVD quality. To get 4G LTE speed, you must have a 4G LTE capable device and 4G LTE SIM. Actual availability, coverage, and speed may vary. A month equals 30 days. Please refer always to the latest terms and conditions of service at simplemobile.com.
Napa know-how.
Tooling around the yard on a riding mower isn't just yard time.
That's listen to the game time, enjoy the great outdoors time, or maybe just think about absolutely nothing time. Unless you've got a dead battery, that's no fun time. So head to Napa, where lawn and garden batteries are as low as $21.99 with exchange. That's $21.99, just in time for mowing time. That's Napa Know-How.
Napa Know-How.
At participating Napa Auto Parts stores. Offer expires 4/30/17.
It's Your Town with David Potter on 103.7 FM and 1220 KOFO.
And we're back with the last segment of Your Town here on KOFO 1220 and 103.7 FM. Got about 5 minutes left in the show. Before we took the break, I was talking about the 24-hour news cycle, cable news networks, and now how the presence of online news and social media has just made it even worse. Where every time something, and there's an old saying, and I'd heard this long before I ever started working in media, was if it bleeds, it leads, and that you can see that in play when you look at the story selection from a lot of these news networks, but with the negativity and all these awful things we're constantly hearing about it, we're slowly being brainwashed to live in fear. Now, when I say brainwashed, I don't mean deliberately, not like some shadowy entity is watching all of this and laughing about how their master plan is coming together, but we've done this to ourselves. We've become addicted to horror, and more specifically, addicted to reacting to it on social media. Every time Donald Trump sneezes, I see a cascade of tweets about it, and I'm certainly I'm not going to start the Donald Trump fan club, but at this point, I'm getting a little tired of hearing about it. I honestly saw something on Twitter the other day, a link to an article about a safety inspection, a code inspection that had been done in his kitchen in Mar-a-Lago. I don't care. I mean, there's just so much news coming out, and all of it has some sort of negative slant to it, it would seem. And it's created a situation where people are they're frightened of walking out their front door, and now to come full circle, it's created a situation where people are clamoring for ineffective, frightening active shooter training in our elementary schools, despite the fact that on a given day, any school in the country has about a 1 in 2 million chance of a gun being fired in the school. A child averaging 175 school days per year between kindergarten and high school will go through about 2,300 days of school. And even that gives them a 0.001% chance of ever experiencing this phenomenon. And yes, it's scary, and yes, if they ever do, it's going to be horrific, and we all hope that it never happened, but chances are that it never will to you or anyone you've ever met. But we've still got people up in arms acting like it's a matter of not if, but when. Stop. It's part of the problem. Again, those in charge should create plans, and teachers and probably older students should be given information on how to handle violent situations in a school setting. Again, we do it for other risks, even ones that aren't likely to happen. But young children could probably be given very basic information on what to do if there's a dangerous situation. But ease up, people. Put your biases aside. Put what various forms of media have told you aside, and realize that the world probably isn't quite what you think it is. We're not under constant attack. It feels like we're losing a war that isn't even real. There are real dangers in our country, real threats, and school shootings are a real threat. They're one of them. But you shouldn't live your life paralyzed by fear about how awful the world has become just because awful things happen in the world. That's been happening since the history of time. Read a book from any area, read the Bible. There have been bad things happening as long as there have been people. We had a couple of scary incidents in Ottawa this week. How many weeks did we not have any scary incidents with guns or death threats in Ottawa? More than you can count. So again, relax. We're going to get through this. I'm not saying that the world can't be a scary place at times, and when you think about things like the shooting at San Bernardino earlier this week, and Newtown and Columbine, and the ones that have, it's happened enough that you don't even remember all of them. And when you take all that into account, because your world and my world are so small relative to the entire world and even to the entire country, that adds up, and it leads to you feeling Like, my goodness, this is happening all the time, everywhere. This is a major threat. We have to take action. We have to do something. It's a matter of wanting to satiate that need for feeling like you've done something to address a problem that you feel, and a problem that you feel very emotional about. We all get very emotional about our children and our children's safety, and we want to make sure that our kids are as safe as possible. But so do the schools. And if you didn't think that at some level, then you wouldn't be sending your children there. You'd homeschool, send them to a private school, which, by the way, there are plenty of private schools who don't do these sorts of things either. So it's not just an issue of any one school district or public schools, but we're all in this together. But the vast majority of us make it out okay each day. That doesn't mean there aren't stressors and fears and a whole lot of things that can and do go wrong in our lives, but don't get sucked into the idea that you're living in a war zone and that you have to be just so scared all the time. You don't. Again, that's only my opinion, but I've given you some information here too, so just think about it. Thank you once again for listening. This has been Your Town on KOFO 1220 103.7 FM.
Information and entertainment in East Central Kansas. KOFO K279CS Ottawa, where keeping you informed comes first.
Here's the latest from ABC News. I'm Mark Remillard. President Trump back in Florida at his Mar-a-Lago Golf Club for the holiday weekend. ABC's Karen Travers has more on Trump's weekly address that highlights the Easter holiday.
President Trump sending a message to the millions of Americans gathering this week to celebrate Passover and Easter.
We pray for the strength and wisdom to achieve a better tomorrow, one where good people of all faiths, Christians and Muslims and Jewish and Hindu, can follow their hearts and worship according to their conscience.
The president says faith is the source of hope